London, 1853. The needle pricked Pearl Dawson's finger for the third time that hour, drawing a crimson bead that threatened to stain the delicate ivory silk beneath her hands. She brought the wounded digit to her lips and glanced anxiously at the ornate clock ticking away on the mantelpiece. For hours until the Countess of Pembroke expected her gown for the Thornfield Ball, the most anticipated event of the season. "Miss Dawson, are you quite finished with my sister's alterations?" Lady Harriet Wilford's sharp voice cut through the quiet rustle of fabric. "I remind you that we are not paying you to dawdle." Pearl nodded quickly, tucking a loose strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. "Nearly complete, my lady. Just the final beadwork remains. See that it's done properly. The Duke of Thornwall will be in attendance, and Cecilia must look her absolute best." Lady Harriet's lips curved into a calculating smile. Mother is determined to secure his interest before the season ends. When the lady departed, Pearl released a long-held breath. The Wilfords' drawing room, with its heavy velvet draperies and imposing portraits, always made her feel as though the painted eyes were judging her, the poor seamstress who dared enter through the front door rather than the servants' entrance, a concession made only because Lady Wilford couldn't bear the thought of her daughter's gowns being carried through the kitchens. Pearl returned to her work, fingers flying across the fabric, each stitch perfect despite her exhaustion. At 23, she had built a modest reputation among certain circles of London society as a skilled needlewoman with an eye for fashion that belied her humble origins. It wasn't the life she had imagined as a child, when her father still lived and their small bookshop had provided a comfortable existence, but it kept her and her ailing mother from the poorhouse. "The beading is exquisite," came a soft voice from the doorway. Pearl startled, looking up to find Lady Cecilia Wilford studying her handiwork. Unlike her haughty sister, the youngest Wilford daughter possessed a gentleness that made Pearl's long hours in their home somewhat bearable. "Thank you, my lady. I hope it meets your expectations for tomorrow evening." Cecilia sighed, sinking into a chair. "I care little for the ball, to be honest. It's Mother and Harriet who are determined to parade me before the Duke like a prized mare." Pearl's lips twitched with suppressed amusement. "The Duke of Thornwall is considered quite the catch, I hear. Dominic Thornton may possess half of Yorkshire and a lineage dating back to the Conquest, but he's rumoured to be cold as ice and twice as hard," Cecilia whispered conspiratorially. "Though terribly handsome, according to my sister's friends who've seen him in London." Pearl kept her expression neutral as she worked, though privately she thought the nobility's obsession with advantageous matches rather than affection a peculiar custom. Her parents had married for love, a luxury apparently reserved for those without titles or vast estates to consider. "There, finished," Pearl announced hours later, holding up the completed gown. The silk shimmered in the fading daylight, hundreds of tiny crystal beads catching the light like morning dew. Lady Wilford swept into the room to inspect the work, her critical eye searching for any flaw. Finding none, she grudgingly nodded her approval. "It will do. Though I've half a mind to withhold payment after your tardiness last month." Pearl felt heat rise to her cheeks. "My lady, as I explained, my mother's illness, yes. Spare me the dreary details." Lady Wilford waved a dismissive hand. "Cecilia needs one final fitting. Quickly now, we haven't all evening." As Pearl helped Cecilia into the gown, the young woman whispered, "I've convinced Mother to invite you to make emergency repairs tomorrow night. The kitchen has prepared extra staff meals. You could eat properly for once." Pearl's stomach clenched at the tempting offer. Her last proper meal had been days ago, the meagre payment from her previous commission stretched thin between rent, her mother's medicine, and the barest essentials. "That's very kind, my lady. It's the least I can do after seeing how Harriet speaks to you." Cecilia's expression darkened. "Sometimes I believe she forgets that those who make her gowns are human beings." The following evening found Pearl stationed in a small antechamber off the Grand Thornfield ballroom, needle and thread at the ready for any wardrobe emergencies that might arise during the festivities. The sounds of the orchestra floated through the door, along with bursts of laughter and the steady hum of conversation. Pearl closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to imagine what it might be like to glide across the polished floor in one of her own creations, rather than waiting in the shadows to repair them. Such fantasies were dangerous, she knew. They led only to discontent. The door burst open, and Pearl jumped to her feet, expecting a lady with a torn hem or loose beading. Instead, a tall gentleman in impeccable evening wear strode in, shutting the door firmly behind him. "Thank God, a moment's peace," he muttered, before noticing Pearl's presence. "Forgive me, I didn't realize this room was occupied." Pearl cursed awkwardly, unsure of the proper protocol. "I'm merely the seamstress, sir. Here for repairs." The man studied her with startling blue eyes, his expression unreadable. His dark hair was swept back from a face that artists would clamor to capture, strong jawline, aristocratic nose, and a mouth that seemed reluctant to smile. "A seamstress? Then you're the one responsible for the gown Lady Cecilia Wilford is wearing." I overheard her mother boasting of securing London's most talented needlewoman. Pearl blinked in surprise. "Yes, sir. Though Lady Wilford exaggerates my reputation." "She doesn't. The work is exceptional." His gaze was disconcertingly direct. "You have an artist's eye." Before Pearl could respond, the door opened again, revealing an elegantly dressed gentleman with a fox-like face and calculating eyes. "There you are, Thornwall." "Half the ballroom is wondering where the guest of honor has disappeared to," the newcomer remarked, then noticed Pearl. His eyebrows rose suggestively. "Ah, I see you've found more pleasing company than those marriage-minded mammas." Pearl felt her cheeks flame with mortification as she realized she was alone in a room with the Duke of Thornwall himself, the very man Lady Wilford hoped would propose to Cecilia by season's end. "Lord Reeves, your insinuation insults this lady," the Duke said coldly. "She is here in a professional capacity." Lord Reeves smirked. Of course. Though one can hardly blame you for seeking refuge. I counted no fewer than 14 eligible young ladies positioned strategically near the refreshments, awaiting your appearance." "How fascinating that you had time to count," the Duke replied dryly. He turned to Pearl with a slight bow. "Forgive the interruption to your work, Miss Dawson, Your Grace." "Pearl Dawson." "Miss Dawson." He nodded once, then allowed Lord Reeves to usher him back toward the ball. Pearl released a shaky breath once the door closed behind them. Meeting a duke was certainly not part of her expected duties for the evening, and the encounter left her strangely unsettled. The remainder of the night passed in a blur of minor repairs, a loose button here, a torn hem there, and Pearl was grateful for Lady Cecilia's kindness in ensuring she received a hearty meal from the kitchens. As promised, it was the first substantial food she'd eaten in days. The ball was winding down when Lady Wilford appeared, her face pinched with displeasure. "Pack your things immediately, Miss Dawson. Your services are no longer required tonight." Her voice was brittle with barely contained fury. "Has something happened, my lady?" Pearl asked, already gathering her supplies. "What has happened is that my daughter has made a complete fool of herself, spilling wine down the front of her gown just as the Duke approached. He departed shortly after." Lady Wilford's eyes narrowed suspiciously. One would almost think the seams weren't strong enough to withstand normal movement. Pearl straightened, stung by the unfair accusation. "I assure you, the construction was sound." "Your assurances mean nothing. Cecilia's prospects may be ruined." Lady Wilford thrust a few coins into Pearl's palm, less than half the promised amount. "This should cover your time tonight. I'll need to engage a more reliable seamstress for the remainder of the season." Pearl's heart sank. The Wilford commission had been her most consistent source of income. Without it, her mother's medicine, their rent, all of it was now in jeopardy. "My lady, please reconsider." "My mother depends on, that is hardly my concern, Miss Dawson," Lady Wilford cut her off coldly. "Good evening." The walk home through London's dark streets was long and disheartening. Pearl clutched her sewing kit to her chest, mind racing with calculations and possibilities, none of them promising. By the time she reached the small room she shared with her mother in an unfashionable corner of the city, her eyes burned with unshed tears. "Is that you, Pearl?" her mother called weakly from the bedroom. Pearl forced brightness into her voice. Yes, mother. The ball was magnificent. You should have seen the gowns. She moved to her mother's bedside, taking the frail hand in hers. Consumption had ravaged Eleanor Dawson's once vibrant beauty, leaving her gaunt and pale against the worn bed linens. Tell me everything, her mother whispered. Every detail. So Pearl described the glittering chandeliers, the sumptuous refreshments, the elegant dancers, constructing an enchanted evening from glimpses caught through doorways and servants' gossip. She said nothing of Lady Wilford's dismissal or her encounter with the Duke. Some burdens were hers alone to bear. When her mother finally drifted to sleep, Pearl slumped at their small table, allowing reality to crash down upon her. Without the Wilfords' patronage, she would need to find new clients immediately. She had enough saved for one more week's rent and perhaps another bottle of her mother's medicine, but after that... A knock at the door startled her from her grim calculations. No one called at this hour in this neighborhood unless bringing bad news. Pearl hesitated before opening the door a cautious crack. A liveried footman stood outside, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the shabby hallway. "Miss Pearl Dawson?" he inquired. "Yes?" He extended a sealed letter. "From His Grace, the Duke of Thornwall." "I'm to wait for your response." Pearl accepted the letter with trembling fingers, breaking the wax seal emblazoned with the Thornwall crest. Inside was a brief note in a strong, decisive hand, *Miss Dawson*. Your skill with needle and thread has come to my attention. My sister, Lady Diana Thornton, requires a skilled seamstress for her coming-out gown and seasonal wardrobe. Your reputation suggests you may be suited to the task. Please call at Thornwall House tomorrow at 11 o'clock to discuss the commission, should you find it agreeable. D. Thornton, Duke of Thornwall. Pearl read the letter twice, certain she had misunderstood. A commission from the Duke of Thornwall? For his sister's entire seasonal wardrobe? Such work would secure her finances for months. Miss? His Grace awaits your reply, the footman prompted. Please inform the Duke that I accept his invitation and will present myself at Thornwall House tomorrow as requested, Pearl managed, still stunned by this unexpected turn of fortune. After the footman departed, Pearl sank onto a chair, the letter clutched to her chest. Providence had intervened when she needed it most, but why would a Duke of the realm seek out a seamstress of her modest standing? And how had he even known where to find her? Sleep eluded her that night as she contemplated these questions, along with what such a prestigious commission might mean for her future. By morning, she had convinced herself that it must have been Lady Cecilia who recommended her services, a final kindness before their association ended. Thornwall House loomed imposingly on Berkeley Square, its neoclassical facade speaking of old money and older lineage. Pearl, dressed in her one good wool dress, dark blue and severely cut, felt painfully out of place as she approached the servants' entrance. To her surprise, she was immediately escorted not to a back room, but through a series of opulent chambers to a bright morning room where a young woman sat sketching by the window. The family resemblance was unmistakable, the same striking blue eyes as the Duke, though her features were softer, framed by glossy dark curls. "Miss Dawson, my lady," the butler announced. Lady Diana Thornton looked up with an eager smile. "Miss Dawson! How wonderful to meet you at last. My brother has told me of your exceptional talent." Pearl curtsied, confusion evident on her face. "I'm honored, my lady, though I confess I'm puzzled by how His Grace came to know of my work." "Oh, Dominic notices everything," Diana said dismissively. "It's quite irritating, actually. Nothing escapes his attention." She gestured to the chair opposite hers. "Please, sit. I have so many ideas for my coming-out gowns." The next hour passed in a whirlwind of sketches, fabric swatches, and enthusiastic descriptions from Lady Diana, who proved to be as warm and effusive as her brother was reserved. Pearl found herself charmed by the young woman's genuine excitement about her first season, so different from the calculated ambitions of the Wilford ladies. "Diana, I trust you're not overwhelming Miss Dawson with your theatrical visions of ball gowns with built-in aviaries." The Duke's deep voice drew Pearl's attention to the doorway, where he stood watching their consultation with an amused expression. "Don't be absurd, Dominic," Diana retorted. Miss Dawson appreciates creative vision, unlike some brothers I could name. Indeed. The Duke entered the room fully, his tall figure somehow making the spacious chamber seem smaller. Miss Dawson, I hope my sister's requests remain within the realm of possibility. Pearl smiled despite her nervousness. Lady Diana has excellent taste, Your Grace. Her ideas are both fashionable and feasible. High praise, coming from an artist of your caliber. His direct gaze made Pearl's cheeks warm. I wonder if I might speak with you privately for a moment? Diana, perhaps you could review your sketches while we step out. Diana waved them away, already absorbed in her drawings again. The Duke led Pearl to a small adjoining study, closing the door partially behind them. Miss Dawson, there is something you should know. His expression grew serious. I did not seek you out solely based on your evident skill with a needle. Pearl's stomach tightened with apprehension. I don't understand, Your Grace. I observed how Lady Wilford treated you last night. Her dismissal was both unfair and, if I may say, remarkably foolish. His jaw tightened momentarily. I have little patience for those who abuse their position to mistreat others. Pearl stood very still, struggling to comprehend that a duke, a man who stood at the pinnacle of society, had noticed her ill treatment and, more shockingly, cared enough to intervene. While I appreciate Your Grace's concern, I cannot accept charity, she said carefully. The Duke's eyebrows rose. This is not charity, Miss Dawson. My sister genuinely requires new gowns, and you genuinely possess the skill to create them. That I find satisfaction in thwarting Lady Wilford's petty cruelties is merely a pleasant coincidence. A smile tugged at Pearl's lips despite herself. When you put it that way, Your Grace, how can I refuse? Excellent. He reached for a small leather folder on the desk. Here is an advance for materials and your time. Diana can be exacting in her requirements. I suspect you'll earn every penny. The amount he handed her was 3 times what she would have normally charged. Pearl started to protest, but the Duke raised a hand to forestall her objections. The fee is commensurate with the quality I expect and the expedited timeline we require. Diana's presentation at court is in 6 weeks. Pearl nodded, overwhelmed by this sudden reversal of her fortunes. I won't disappoint you or Lady Diana, Your Grace. Something flickered in his eyes, something that made Pearl's breath catch momentarily. Somehow, Miss Dawson, I don't believe you could. The commission from the Thornton family transformed Pearl's life. With the generous advance, she secured a better physician for her mother, whose health began to improve under proper care. She purchased quality materials and even hired a young girl from her building to assist with basic stitching, allowing her to focus on the more intricate work Lady Diana's gowns required. Most surprisingly, the Duke himself took an interest in her progress, often present during Pearl's fittings with his sister. His questions were thoughtful, his observations astute, and Pearl found herself looking forward to their conversations, which ranged from fashion to literature to art. You have an exceptional mind, Miss Dawson, he remarked one afternoon as she adjusted the hem on Diana's presentation gown. Where did you receive your education? Pearl smiled, thinking of her father's bookshop. My classroom was between shelves of Shakespeare and Milton, Your Grace. My father believed girls deserved learning as much as boys. A progressive thinker. You must miss him greatly. Every day, Pearl admitted softly. Diana, who had been patiently standing still during their conversation, sighed dramatically. Dominic, you've never shown such interest in my previous seamstresses. One might almost think you're more interested in Miss Dawson than in my gowns. Diana! The Duke's sharp tone carried a warning, but Pearl noticed a faint color rise to his cheeks. The incident might have been forgotten, except that Pearl began to notice other small signs, the way the Duke arranged to be home during her appointments, how his eyes followed her movements, the small courtesies he extended that went far beyond a nobleman's usual treatment of a tradesperson. It was madness to read anything into such gestures, Pearl told herself firmly. The gap between a duke and a seamstress was unbridgeable. Yet sometimes, when their eyes met unexpectedly, she wondered if he felt the same inexplicable connection that had begun to occupy her thoughts at all hours. 3 days before Lady Diana's presentation at court, Pearl arrived at Thornwall House for a final fitting, only to find the household in disarray. "Oh, Miss Dawson, thank goodness you're here," Lady Diana exclaimed, rushing toward her with reddened eyes. "The most dreadful thing has happened. Dominic has been hurt in a riding accident in the park. The doctors are with him now." Pearl's heart lurched painfully. "How serious is it, my lady?" "They won't tell me anything." Diana wrung her hands. "Just that he was thrown from his horse and hasn't regained consciousness." For the next hour, Pearl did her best to distract the young woman with the final adjustments to her presentation gown, though her own thoughts were consumed with worry for the Duke. When the doctor finally emerged from the upper floors, both women rushed to hear his report. "His Grace is awake," the physician announced, addressing Diana. "The head injury appears less severe than we feared, though he'll need complete rest for several days. No excitement, no visitors beyond immediate family." Diana sagged with relief. "May I see him now?" "Briefly." "He's asking for you, and, curiously, for a Miss Dawson." Diana turned to Pearl with wide eyes. "You must come with me." "But the doctor said family only," Pearl protested, though her heart raced at the thought that the Duke had asked for her. "Nonsense. If Dominic asked for you, that's what matters." Diana was already pulling her toward the stairs. The Duke's bedchamber was dimly lit, heavy curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. He lay propped against pillows, a white bandage stark against his dark hair. His face brightened visibly when he saw them enter. "Diana." "Miss Dawson." "Forgive me for causing such alarm." Diana rushed to his bedside, scolding him for his carelessness even as she blinked back tears. Pearl remained near the door, uncertain of her place in this intimate family moment. After assuring his sister of his recovery, the Duke's gaze shifted to Pearl. "Miss Dawson, would you mind remaining for a moment? There's something I need to discuss regarding Diana's wardrobe." It was a transparent excuse, but Diana played along, kissing her brother's cheek before departing with a meaningful glance at Pearl. When the door closed, Pearl approached the bed hesitantly. "Your Grace, I'm so relieved to see you awake." Lady Diana was beside herself with worry. "And you, Miss Dawson? Were you concerned as well?" His voice was weaker than usual, but his eyes held their customary intensity. "Of course. We all were." Pearl clasped her hands tightly before her. The Duke studied her for a long moment. "When my horse threw me, my first thought as I fell wasn't of Diana, or my estates, or any of the responsibilities that have defined my life." His voice dropped lower. "It was of you, Pearl." The use of her given name sent a tremor through her. "Your Grace, the doctor said you shouldn't excite yourself, Dominic," he corrected. "And what would excite me most at this moment would be to hear you call me by my name, just once." Pearl swallowed hard. "Dominic," she whispered, the intimacy of it shocking even as it felt right on her lips. He closed his eyes briefly, as if savoring the sound. When one faces mortality, even briefly, it brings remarkable clarity. "I've been fighting my feelings for you since the night we met, telling myself it was impossible, the Duke of Thornwall, falling in love with a seamstress." Pearl's breath caught. "In love?" "Completely, irrevocably, and with a devotion that frightens me." His hand reached for hers, and she found herself unable to resist taking it. "I don't care what society will say. I don't care about anything except the thought of living my life without you." Tears welled in Pearl's eyes. "You cannot know what you're saying. The scandal would be enormous." "Your reputation, let them talk," Dominic said fiercely. "I want you by my side, Pearl Dawson, not as my sister's seamstress, but as my wife. The Duchess of Thornwall." Pearl pulled her hand away, overwhelmed. "This is your injury speaking. When you've recovered, I will feel exactly the same," he finished firmly. "But I see I've shocked you with my directness. Forgive me. Perhaps we might begin more conventionally." A smile touched his lips. "Miss Dawson, would you do me the honor of allowing me to court you properly?" Pearl looked into his eyes and saw no hesitation there, only a certainty that matched the feelings she had been denying in her own heart. Still, she had to be sure. "Society will never accept me," she said softly. "Then society must change, because I will accept nothing less than having you as my Duchess." His expression softened. "You needn't answer now. Consider it while I recover. But know that my mind is made up, and has been since I watched you defend your work to Lady Wilford with more dignity than most peers display in Parliament." 3 months later, London society was scandalized by the announcement in the Times, His Grace, Dominic Thornton, Duke of Thornwall, is pleased to announce his betrothal to Miss Pearl Dawson of London. The wedding will take place next month at St. George's, Hanover Square. Speculation ran rampant through drawing rooms and gentlemen's clubs. Some called it the scandal of the decade, others, a romantic fairy tale. Lady Wilford nearly fainted upon reading the notice, while her daughter Cecilia sent Pearl a heartfelt letter of congratulations. On her wedding day, Pearl wore a gown of her own creation, ivory silk with delicate embroidery telling the story of their unlikely romance in subtle symbols only she and Dominic would recognize. A needle and thread intertwined with a ducal coronet. A pearl nestled beside a Thornton rose. As Pearl walked down the aisle toward the man who had upended every expectation of her life, she glimpsed her mother in the front pew, healthy enough now to witness her daughter's happiness. Behind Eleanor sat Lady Diana, beaming with pride at gaining a sister she had championed from the start. Dominic's face as he watched her approach held such naked adoration that whispers rippled through the congregation. By evening, the story of how the Duke of Thornwall looked at his seamstress bride would spread throughout London, softening even the most critical hearts. "Are you ready to scandalize the ton for the rest of our lives?" Dominic murmured as he took her hand before the altar. Pearl smiled, no longer the hesitant seamstress but a woman who knew her worth and her heart. "With you? Always." And so began the greatest love story London had witnessed in a generation, one that would, in time, change perceptions of class and worth throughout society. For if a duke could recognize that true value lay in character rather than circumstance, perhaps others might learn the same. The ballads and penny novels would come later, romanticizing their tale for decades to come. But for Pearl and Dominic, the real story was simpler and more profound, two people who found in each other exactly what they hadn't known they were seeking, and who, together, created a love strong enough to defy convention and endure through time.